statement, I guess. The webinar today is Curriculum Development Considerations for Diversity and Inclusion. Sorry about that. I was trying to make sure that we got recorded too. So the recording is on now. Anyway, again, my name is Lori Bedford from the Center for Faculty Excellence, and welcome today to our webinar. We have with us three really, really knowledgeable and expert presenters on this topic. We have Savitra Dixon-Saxon. We have Jackie Frazier and Laurel Walsh. Sandra Bever is one of the presenters too, but she was unable to join us. So if you were here earlier, you heard us working to make sure that that content was covered. So thanks for your patience with that. I'd like to get started on our webinar here just as quickly as we can, but first a few things, a few housekeeping things. If you've not been in a webinar lately, or perhaps this is your first time in an Adobe webinar, a couple things to remember. The large box that you see in the middle is the content for today's webinar. It's the PowerPoint presentation. You can follow along. And I will send a copy of this along with a link to the recording to everyone who's here today. So you'll receive a copy of that. You can review the PowerPoint, review the recording at your leisure, share it with colleagues, engage in some conversation around this important topic. We also here over to the left-hand side at the top, we have Cindy, who's our captioner for today, so if you need that service, you can follow along. Just below that is the chat area. The chat area is a place for everyone to post their questions, comments, insights, experiences. What you post there is visible to the entire group, so please feel free to interact using that chat room. Over on the right-hand side of the screen, you see our presenters, our hosts, and all of our colleagues who are with us today. We do appreciate your interaction, so like I said, please feel free to post in the chat. If you'd like to share verbally, we'd love to hear your voice. You can click on the raise hand drop-down box from the top of the menu. You see that on your screen now. If you click on that, that alerts me, lets me know you'd like to share verbally. And if you're on voice over IP, I can activate your microphone. If you're on the telephone, you can just unmute yourself and share that way. I would ask you, if you are on the phone at your own workstation, if you would just mute yourself there. That really helps eliminate some background noise if there's something going on in your office that we could hear. Appreciate that. As I said today, we are recording the session, so just keep that in mind. You will receive a copy of that link to that recording. If you do need some help, there's a help button for Adobe Connect, but usually I can work through if you've got some audio issues or you have some questions about where you can find resources or different parts of the room. Go ahead and type that into the chat, and as we move along, I can help you with those questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters, and I believe that Savitra is going to get started.
I am going to get started, but I want to just check with you, Lori, to let me know if you hear any background noise right now.
I don't hear any. You're loud and clear. Sounds great, Savitra.
Perfect. So the first thing I want to do is just thank my colleagues, Jackie Frazier and Laurel Walsh, for being here together. I'm sure that Laurel and Jackie never imagined we would actually spend so much time working together. But what's great about this is that I think we have developed a unique chemistry along with Sandra that allows us to share from the heart information we think is important to share with our colleagues in the Walden community, primarily because we care about our community and our students, and we have spent this kind of time focusing on diversity considerations for the curriculum. This presentation started out being a part of the training we did for our diversity and inclusion ambassadors, and thought that the information would be useful enough to share to a broader and wider audience. Hopefully we'll have you all will be generous in the chat area and in discussion and sharing your ideas about how we can make our curriculum in the online platform a more inclusive one. So the first thing you see is a quote by the Minister of Education in Canada: "Inclusion is not bringing people into what already exists. It is making a new space, a better space for everyone." And I actually like the quote that our own Laurel Walsh shared with us as a diversity and inclusion group about 2 years ago. And she told us that diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. So primarily what you will hear us talk about are ways that we can respond to diversity and inclusion in our curriculum and in our academic environment, but primarily we will be talking about moving from just focusing on diversity to creating a more inclusive environment. So why are we having this conversation with you, and why did we think it was important? Primarily it's because we really believe that all learners thrive in classrooms where they feel included. We feel like it's necessary for them to thrive. We feel like students who feel excluded generally struggle to learn. So focusing on ways that we can be more inclusive in our curriculum allows us to level the playing field, and it also allows our students to develop the skills they need for the world of work. What are some of the characteristics of a curriculum reflective of diversity and inclusion, you might ask? I'll share them with you. One of the first things is that a curriculum reflective of diversity and inclusion provides learners with the opportunity to demonstrate their acquisition of knowledge in more than one format. So a curriculum or a learning environment reflective of diversity and inclusion is not one that only has writing assignments. It's one that allows students to demonstrate what they have learned from their communities and their interactions with the world. It allows students to demonstrate their expertise in oral communication. It allows students to demonstrate their critical thinking skills on real world situations. It allows for students to develop competencies that they need, but also to demonstrate the expertise they come to your organization with. Another characteristic of the curriculum is that there is an intercultural focus, and students find in those classrooms that the depictions of cultural events or historical events, society, family, and values are reflective of diverse groups of people and don't just come from one group's perspective. Another characteristic is that it's reflective of innovation and openness and not rigid ethnocentric practices and policies. One of the things we know is that a trend in higher education is for us to look for opportunities to be more innovative and engaging. What you will hear from us and hear us discuss actually are strategies that are universal in design. They wound up benefiting all learners. Another characteristic of a curriculum reflective of diversity and inclusion is that it inspires all learners to be successful, and all learners benefit equally. So as you develop a curriculum, there are 5 areas that we have offered to you as areas you need to be concerned about your learners' needs, and that is in the social domain, physical domain, intellectual, cultural, and emotional domains. But what I really want to make sure I have an opportunity to share with you is something I was really excited to see, and it's the diversity and inclusivity framework. Now, I know the writing here is small, so I'm going to take a little bit of time to go through this very carefully. This diversity and inclusivity framework describes the elements of your curriculum, and you can see in the third element, my S kind of moved down to the second line. I didn't notice that before. And then to the right, you see an inclusivity continuum. And so just using the first example, the first element is purpose and goals. Now, what you see is that to the left of the continuum, we prepare our students for whatever it is that they're supposed to learn. And then you see that we can move to preparing students for diverse experiences. And then finally, you see prepare students to actively engage in a diverse society. One of the best examples I can share with you is I still am, writing chapters for textbooks. And what I remember about my counseling text years ago was that you would get general information that seemed to apply to groups of people who were in the majority in the United States. And then once you finish the chapter, you would get to the end and it would say, considerations for diversity. And then that would, then you would see the chapter summary, and that was the end. What I really appreciated, recently I had a chance to write a chapter with a former colleague, and we made a decision that every example we use would be reflective of diverse groups, that we would look for opportunities to make the experiences of groups of people who are typically marginalized in text the main experience that was going to be explored. You all remember that we have evolved as people who talk about diversity and inclusion. When I first started being trained around diversity and inclusion, it was 28 years ago, and at that time, we focused on teaching people awareness of diversity. And then we moved to respecting diversity, and then there was appreciating diversity, and then we became more enlightened, and we wanted people to develop cultural sensitivity. And then we moved to becoming culturally competent. I would like to think now, when we think about designing a curriculum, we look for opportunities to be culturally humble and create a diverse and inclusive environment with our curriculum. When we develop our curriculum, though, there are a lot of things we still have to make sure we keep in mind. We want to make sure that even as we take in considerations for diversity and inclusion, we want to make sure that we're always supporting our university mission. But what we're aiming to do is increase the likelihood of success for more learners. We want our learners to be confident in the learning environment, and we really want to normalize and validate diverse perspectives. As a person who's raised a child by myself since the child was 2 years old, one of the things I always attend to is examples of families in the curriculum or in text or in magazines. Do I see examples of families that look like me, or do I feel marginalized because I am a single mother raising a child by myself? Those are the kinds of things we need to think about. Do we have a curriculum that acknowledges the importance of extended families, or do we have a curriculum that is only focused on, do we have a curriculum that focuses more on capitalism than collective working together, or collectively moving forward to promote the agenda of not just an individual but the community? Those are the kinds of things that indicate to our students whether or not we are only looking at their professional development from the perspective of a more dominant group or a group that's in the majority, or if we're really taking in the perspectives of marginalized groups and looking for opportunities to make that learning that benefits everybody. Here's the other thing about the importance of considering diversity and inclusion, and I just mentioned this before. We really want our students, all of our students, to be able to work with diverse populations. So the way we develop our curriculum, if we're universal in design and we consider diversity and inclusion, not just consider it, but that it is a part of our mainstream, it better prepares our students to work with diverse populations. And the final outcome is that it allows us to develop responsible students and citizens and responsible graduates. And you made a comment. You said you like the notion of cultural humility, and one of the people on this call is Elizabeth McDonald from the School of Counseling, and I'm not sure if Carrie Bailey participated in this as well, but a few years ago we actually engaged in conversations about cultural humility conversations in the School of Counseling. And the idea of cultural humility is not that you will, it takes into account that we're not likely ever to be competent in understanding different groups because the world is dynamic. But we can be humble and allow people to tell us for themselves what they value, what's important, and we can listen when they're defining themselves for themselves. As a matter of fact, as educators, we can encourage self-definition. So I just wanted to explain that a little bit further. At this point, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Laurel Walsh.
Hello. It's always so tricky to follow our beloved Dr. Dixon Saxon on a presentation because she does such a wonderful job of making this also approachable. And everybody who's here on this call today, all of you are hoping to become more nimble when it comes to handling the complex issues of diversity and inclusion in your classroom. And I always think, you know, hats off to CFE. You're providing professional development for all of us working in different disciplines at different degree levels with different levels of physical time in communication with our students. So this is a really complex topic, and one of the things that Jackie and I and others, Sandra, we really went and did a lot of research on how do we support our faculty as they try to navigate these issues in their classrooms. So one of the things that has come out really predominantly throughout all of this is our faculty do not always reflect the diverse and inclusive vision of culture that our classrooms do. And so how do we as educators who may not have had ever the experience of being someone who doesn't speak the language or has any kind of an outsider perspective, one of the ways that we can really dismantle the way that curriculum hinders all voices is to discuss and address white privilege. I've been at events, I remember an assessment training early on, and one of the speakers said, well, here at Walden we're colorblind. And this was meant to be a positive insight about Walden, and my heart just sunk because anybody who would want to deprive themselves of being able to see the bounty and the beauty in our students and the variety of cultural experiences and global perspectives they bring and just somehow not see that is really missing an opportunity to leverage the communal wisdom we have in our classrooms. But this idea that to teach diversity, we have to unpack whiteness. We have to unpack patriarchy and how that has impacted the types of things that are treasured and valued and articulated in curriculum. So this whole point that a socio-political awareness of whiteness by those in dominant positions is really fundamental to the cultural humility piece and making this larger, broader effort towards intercultural. Multicultural is kind of juxtaposing and side by side, but intercultural communication is where we go far beyond diversity for diversity's sake, and we have a real critical lens to engage and use and leverage the wisdom of groups. So this whole idea that inclusive teaching is really a wonderful way to show how important it is to hold our opinions lightly. And this idea that critical thinking is predicated on the recognition that diversity in and of itself is of very little value unless we can enhance communication among diverse individuals and groups. And that is really important for our students who will be practitioners, will be in classrooms, will be in clinics, and will be working with a spectrum of individuals. One of the recommendations that we've been talking about, and I know it's in the new CFE orientation, is to take the Harvard Implicit Bias Test as a faculty member beginning your teaching life to sort of unpack some of your own biases, your shortcuts, your stereotypical thinking that might impede your ability to be a very inclusive teacher here at Walden. So one of the things we wanted to kind of present as we're talking about how important it is for our students to be able to share their narratives, how important it is for us to be able to have those important conversations about our values as teachers. Well, sometimes we're going to run into cultural dimensions in our classroom that we aren't aware of that could impede our ability to connect. So this is one of the theories that we wanted to bring to your attention. It's been very influential in international business programs and cross-cultural leadership, individuals who are looking to manage a team that's off-site, maybe in China, in another country. This theory has really been very useful in helping understand and look at some of the limitations and impediments you might encounter in your classroom as you're attempting to have these important conversations. So again, the text is quite small here, but this, on the left-hand side, you can see a list of characteristics associated with different types of cultural backgrounds. So for example, individualism. We might not even be aware of how, terms like manifest destiny and all these things that could be used in a historical context that have this very individualistic bend may seem illogical or contradictory to an individual who's coming from a more collectivist background. Somebody who was raised in Guatemala or China might feel that this individual thriving for glory and power would be the direct antithesis of elevating a group status or giving honor to others. And so we have to make sure that as we speak to some of our classic, academic constructs, that we aren't inadvertently neglecting an international perspective. A really great example of this, when I used to teach at Metro State University here in St. Paul, Minnesota, we have a high population of Hmong students. And one of my icebreaker questions was really having each other be interviewed, and my students would be asking questions. And after class, a student came up to me and said, man, I'm so uncomfortable about bragging, where I didn't feel like the questions we were asking would be seen as boasting, but from her cultural perspective, I was asking her to brag about family members and different elements of their past and history, which was an incredibly uncomfortable assignment. So even as we look to extract these wonderful narratives in our classroom, we have to be mindful that culture is a lens there as well. Again, the high or low power distance. Is a student going to approach me? Is it enough for me to be approachable as a teacher, or do I have to be very mindful that some places with a high power distance, that approachability is null and void because the student would never take it upon themselves to come directly to me with a concern about my instruction. So again, being able to use the different tools and lenses and perspectives that would help us understand and empower our students to participate is a really important consideration for all of us teaching at Walden. So we have a number of best practices, and one of the wonderful things about working at Walden is our resources. I think we all can agree. And we have a wonderful Office of Disability Services here at Walden. They really help to ensure that our university learning outcomes are reachable for all students. So we have a legal framework. We have a backdrop that the whole of higher ed operates under, and we'll discuss that a little bit more explicitly. But we also have a lot of other ways to guide our best practices to ensure inclusive curriculum design. I think anybody who's been at Walden for a little bit, I'm coming up on 10 years next month, we've had a curriculum that isn't necessarily the most reflective of diversity. Sometimes we joke on our working group that it's sort of the week 10 assignment. You kind of put in a diversity and inclusion discussion board post, and then you wipe your hands of the whole subject because it's in there, it's present. Well, that's really an additive on that spectrum, on that continuum, and it really makes it difficult for us to postpone and delay conversations that might be really topical if that's a week 10 little bit of our overall arching course expectations. But again, the university services that we allow to support our learners, I know Amy Baki's on this call right here, but we're really working diligently to have our multilingual students really well supported so that they can contribute to this important conversation. And there's very clear social change implications for all of us to become more inclusive teachers, for all of us to understand diversity and inclusion as we create curriculum and as we deliver it. It doesn't stop when we create it. It's that piece where the way that you handle these topics and the nimbleness with which you're able to facilitate these broader conversations on really hard topics is such an important skill set for us to have as teachers and staff. So the legal framework, I'll start with, is really the policies and procedures for providing services to individuals who have disabilities at Walden. We have the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we also have the Association of Higher Ed and Disability Services. Our Office of the Disability Services can really address any of these issues that come up. But one of the important things to remember with all of our legal framework, at the end of the day, that lived experience for the student should be seamless and should be as normal and completely inclusive as any other environment that they could encounter. And we really want to empower our faculty to understand that we have tools such like Read Write Gold. I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but it's on our disability services offerings, but it allows students to have their readings read to them. It's free software. It's available to everybody. It's one of the ways that we comply with the legal framework, but again, it's just this absolutely wonderful tool. It's not a screen reader, but it does so much text to type and type to audio that is really powerful for our students, and it has a phonetic dictionary. Again, really, really awesome support for our students. The Office of Disability Services also has residency support on the ground. If you've ever been to a national faculty meeting, we have our disability services representatives there for individuals who might have difficulty getting around physically or have other questions, because we really barrier-free access to Walden's programs, our residencies, and all of the experiences that contribute to learning here. And I think one of the things that draws students to Walden is the fact that learning online might make their accommodation navigation a little bit easier, especially if you have a physical restraint. And so these accommodations on a case-by-case basis are being dealt with by our Office of Disability Services. They have resources for individuals who have limitations with their hearing, different tools and products that can help. And then again, our physical residency experience is equally supported by the same office. So really lucky to have them here at Walden to ensure that we can live our mission this way. University outcome 9, not that you can pick a favorite, but number 9 is really super important to us and to me. Walden University strives to produce graduates with the knowledge, skills, and abilities to support diversity and multiculturalism within their profession, communities, and society. So this is a promise we make as an institution. Our students are promised that we are going to ensure that they will be able to work, navigate, and professionally contribute to their professions through the lens of diversity and multiculturalism. And so the way that it lives out in the classroom is important for us. And I always think it's important to remember, we used to say to students, hey, congratulations, you've graduated, go out in the world, do great things, and please send us more students just like you. Well, if we're going to ask our students to send us more students just like them, we have to become a premier institution at making inclusive teaching part of how we operate on a daily basis. It has to be part and parcel with that pledge to our students. How diversity and inclusion lives in our curriculum design. We make sure that every syllabus statement has a reasonable accommodation statement. We have multiple formats for our text. They're trying out some new, very cool tools in the Foundations course for undergrad, where we're hoping that Alexa can be a reader for some discussion board posts and other things. So we're really looking to be able to help anybody's learning style be supported at Walden in our classroom. And then there's varying assignments that help to engage multiple types of learners. I know one example we were really careful with when I was teaching in undergrad is we wanted students to produce a professional portfolio, but we recognized that there were so many different places in the professional spectrum that our students entered into undergraduate education, so we tiered the assignment. The students could either assess a pre-constructed set of portfolios to see if they met the rubric standards for professional presentation, or they could take that opportunity to create their own LinkedIn profile or portfolio on Pathbright. And this was an opportunity for us to vary an assignment. We had the same level of engagement. The rubric was being used, but in one case it was being used to assess. In another case, the student was assessing others with it. But again, varying our assignments so that multiple types of learners feel comfortable and confident in completing the learning objectives for that assignment is really important. And then we really are careful as we customize our course content to ensure that it's still inclusive. So those of you who love to add a video, there are rules around transcriptioning as we have today in our CFE presentation. So important to enable our students to use each of the supplemental devices that we place in the classroom equally. So just checking with our Office of Disability Services before you were to put a link to a nice video that you wanted them to see to ensure that the caption options would be available to help all of our learners be able to enjoy that. And again, one of the things I absolutely love about Walden is that our curriculum is really faculty-driven. I was teaching a course last term that I co-authored with Dean Kelly Kostner, and it was kind of funny because some of the students would complain about different elements of the course, and you really get a personal pang of sadness when they ask pointed questions about why do we have to do this. But in fact, I could say, hey, I wrote this course, I think it's the time I was writing this course, I really envisioned this with the annotated bibliography assignment that was under question. But again, having our faculty as subject matter experts who are living the curriculum, are delivering it sometimes, and then also have had a really big say in how that material is put together, because we are responsible for ensuring that the content's current, relevant. I serve as a lead faculty. When we see links that are broken or materials that no longer are functioning, that's our job to help escalate that so that we can get a JIRA ticket and get it fixed. So, you know, at the end of the day, when the HLC came and visited us, they really articulated time and again how important a faculty-driven curriculum model is to an institution to thrive, because it shows that our faculty, who are our practitioner, our disciplinary specialists, have been part of forming that broader curriculum delivery to all faculty. And so we really feel comfortable and confident that these types of efforts to ensure the faculty voice is in there and that the faculty has the opportunity to raise to our attention anything that might be awry are so important. And at this point, I am going to turn it back over to Dean Dixon. Oh, no, Dean, Vice Provost Dixon Saxon. Sorry.
Thank you.
I was on a roll.
Thank you. I didn't hear anything wrong with that title. I'm glad you reminded me that I have a whole bunch more work to do. I appreciate it. So I'm going to advance to, I think I'm going to go ahead and take the slide that's on here. It's always important for us to remember that our curriculum content is faculty-driven. And it's important for those of us who are faculty to assert ourselves in that way, to involve ourselves in the decision-making that goes on around our curriculum, to continue to develop as subject matter experts, and understand that identity is not a static one. If you have been identified as a subject matter expert or lead faculty in your area, continue to grow and develop in that content knowledge and stretch yourself to make sure that you can share with others how we make the curriculum and the content more engaging for all of our students. We are responsible for making sure that the content is relevant, and the Higher Learning Commission has the expectation that the curriculum is faculty-driven and that our faculty are engaged in helping, are very engaged, and the leaders in deciding what the content is in our courses. Oops, maybe I don't know how to advance. We have so many support services that are designed to support our learners. The Center for Academic Excellence is a great resource for our students, and they offer support in various formats. We have so many student organizations, and they're growing every day. If our Office of Student Affairs has anything to say about it, and of course, we offer support to our students who are in the military. The Center for Faculty Excellence offers tutoring, training, webinars that are offered in chats, webinars, virtual office hours, phone calls, emails, and individual and group consultations. Our student support, or our social support is available to students in student organizations like honor societies and special interest groups. And while the military support is primarily related to financial aid issues, there is a new military community that exists for our students. There are other resources that help us in our thinking about diversity and inclusion, and specifically our mission that directs us to help our students become agents of change. The existing social change initiatives we have, and of course our Center for Social Change, are all resources that also support us in creating a curriculum and curricular activities that support diversity and inclusion. There are 6 key areas that I want to spend some time talking with you about, and I think that they're very important. 6 key areas for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the curriculum, and you can see them on the screen. The first is guidance and support. We have the responsibility to understand the needs of students and facilitate learning that's accessible. We have to constantly ask ourselves, is an individual student getting what that student needs to be successful? The next thing that I think is a key area is planning and preparation around the learning experience. We have to consider what our learners' prior knowledge is and look for opportunities for students to demonstrate their expertise. We talked about that before. We should consider the skills they need to be successful in the course as well as the discipline, and use innovative techniques to get our students engaged. So to that end, we have to consider not just the content, but we have to consider the assessments we're using for our students. We want to give our students as much information as we can about courses, but some learners really need us to help them understand how it's applicable to what they're going to be doing beyond that moment, and how it's applicable to allowing them to solve problems at that point in their communication, in their community. We want to make sure, this is something I talked about before, you want to make sure that the materials are reflective of different cultures and religions, and you look for opportunities to discuss issues around diversity and equity and inclusion in your course area. The reason this is so important is because people struggle to have honest conversations about diversity and inclusion, which serves as a significant barrier to being able to come up with practical solutions that address people, all people. We have to teach our students to get comfortable having these conversations. I'll tell you an anecdote briefly. My sister works in a corporation, and she has over time developed significant relationships with one of her colleagues. But they're in a very small, the company is in a rather small rural community in the southeast that is desegregated. So it's not segregated, but neither is it integrated. And one day, one of her colleagues was telling her about something that had happened, some event that had happened in the community, because my sister doesn't live in the community, she only works in the community. And her colleague came to her and she said, well, this happened, and they were able to arrest the person they think did it, and it was a black man. And she whispered every time she would say black. And my sister said finally she had to ask her, she said, why do you whisper when you say that it was a black man? And she said, I don't want anyone to think I'm being insensitive. It raises all kinds of questions in our minds, but it really makes us think the degree to which we are uncomfortable talking about issues of race, marginalization, sexism, homonegativity, ableism. We're uncomfortable, so, the good thing is that her friend was willing to respond to her question and she was willing to engage in the conversation, because so often our expectation is that people remain silent. But real progress requires that we speak out loud and that we speak honestly with each other. And our responsibility as educators is to help our students and guide them through these very important conversations. The other key area for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the curriculum is to create a safe environment, and this is really what I was talking about, create a safe environment for students and address bullying quickly. Something that we have done before, we've had presentations at national faculty meetings, and we've done webinars on how to facilitate these crucial conversations with other people. And one of the things we always recommend is that you establish ground rules and expectations for how people will communicate with each other. And as faculty, that is as important for us to do in the online environment as well. And then we want to create opportunities for our students to collaborate and to learn from each other. I always tell people that what I loved about teaching at Walden was that I actually had the same kind of energy and enthusiasm as our students did about the process, because I knew that I was going to learn as much or more every time than they did every time I taught a course. So we want to give our students a space for collaborative learning and discussion and helping them. Here's the other part of what we do. We help them make meaning of what's been discussed, because a lot of times different ideas are thrown out there, but we want to help them pull it together, synthesize it, and understand why it's an important conversation and what some key takeaways seem to be from those conversations. I've already mentioned use a variety of assessments and approaches, provide examples for students, provide explanations for grading. This is really important. When you have students, when you have an environment where there is broad access, a broad access admissions policy, it's not enough to give students the feedback that they've not done something well. You really want to go on and make even your grading be a learning opportunity for students and help them understand why your response is what it is or your evaluation is what it is. And maybe I advanced something when I shouldn't have. I apologize for that. And finally, are you all still there? Can you still hear me?
Yes, Savitra, we can hear you.
Okay, great, great. And finally, the other thing that I would just offer is that creating a diverse and inclusive environment means thinking about your student's life beyond that time that the student is a student, and really helping our students be prepared for their profession. I want to just take an opportunity to share this, and it's a very personal experience, but I hope that you'll see it as relevant. When I went through my doc program, I was one of a few African American women in my program, even though it was a fairly diverse cohort of students. And one of the things that was very obvious to me, I got feedback from my faculty that they loved my ideas. They had appreciation for how I thought about what we were discussing in class. I got great feedback on my papers. But very rarely did a faculty member identify me as someone they wanted to groom in research or groom and collaborate with on presentations or publications. We have the opportunity to really help our students be better prepared for their professions when we partner with them and think about what's expected of the profession and look for those opportunities to help them develop in those ways as well. So that's something else I would add to you, because I could have benefited greatly from someone who was willing to mentor me in publications or in professional presentations. I'm grateful that I was able to pick up some of those skills elsewhere, but it's something for us to think about as we engage in the conversation about diversity and inclusion and equity in the curriculum. So we are charging you with something today because you attended this session, and I hope you will take the charge seriously. And the charge is to be action-oriented. As you go through, in whatever capacity you're moving, either as a faculty member or an administrator, we ask that you examine your policies critically and think about how those policies serve the needs of diverse learners. We also are charging you with developing partnerships with academics to focus on the trends that you've noticed with students and needs that are not currently being met, and work together to find a way to address those needs. We also are charging you with providing consultation to the people in your area as a subject matter expert about considerations for diversity and inclusion in the course development process. Now, this part of the charge requires you to continue to learn and grow and develop yourself in this way so that you can be an informed consultant. We're also charging you with serving on committees like your school academic and policies committee, so that you can make call-outs when you see policies and programs and course syllabi come through for approval. You can raise your hand and bring to people's attention if they've not created a learning experience that is an inclusive one. And direct them to resources and share information with them that allows them to respond to that. And finally, we ask you to, ask your school leadership, for those of you who feel like you're proficient in this area, ask your school leadership if you can be involved in the way curriculum and academic policy committee members are trained around diversity and inclusion. So those are the things that we're charging you with. But I would say if there's an overall charge, it would be to continue to engage in the conversation and continue to be a student of how we can make our curriculum one more reflective of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Hey, Jackie, did I just step on your area? I think I may have. Will you forgive me for doing that?
Who better to step on my toes, Savitra, of course.
So I am going to turn things over to you, though, and ask if you have any additional thoughts you wanted to share with the group.
I think what I would like to add is that as faculty, and I don't know everyone on the call, but as faculty, I think sometimes we feel that we don't have a whole lot of input or a whole lot of control, that, we teach our 2 or 3 courses, we mentor our students. I think what that means for those of us who are really driven to make a difference is that the onus is on us to step up. And I would particularly single out those of us who are white. We've got work to do. Laurel mentioned white privilege a bit earlier. It's, at one of the national faculty meetings a couple of years ago, Savitra was leading a panel about diversity and inclusion. And there was a couple of people sitting behind one of our diversity and inclusion work group colleagues who said, "Oh no, not this stuff again." So, those of us who really are aware of the need to be diverse and inclusive, we have to examine who we are, where we are, what we believe in, what we think needs to happen. We need to say to our program directors and our deans, we really do have the equivalent of the week 10, throw everybody else into the pot, final assignment. we need to make our voices heard and sit on committees, make recommendations, do readings, be aware of our own areas in which we can broaden our views. So I would add that to our charge as well. And I think that we have some time for questions if anyone has questions or if there are comments that people would like to add.
Thank you, Jackie. Yeah, so, as you're reflecting on some of the content that our presenters shared with us today, go ahead and type your questions into the chat, your comments, and we'll just take the last few minutes of our presentation here to review those and to talk about those. And I think that Anne brings up a good point here. She says, what's the best way to respond when we hear that sort of thing? And I think she's referring to what you were talking about, Jackie.
So Jackie was sharing what one of our colleagues overheard someone saying at National Faculty Meeting. One of the things I've learned when I first started doing diversity and inclusion or any work in this area, I always kind of felt like I was right, and people who didn't agree with me were wrong. And without mentioning it specifically, Laurel, Jackie, and I have talked about an experience we had in the very recent past to recognize how important it is to understand other people's perspectives. I think that depending on how well I knew that colleague, Jackie, Ann, I might say to the person, why do you feel that way? But here's the important thing, is I would probably say to a person in that setting, I would love the opportunity to talk with you more about this because I see this topic as so important for our students who are paying to come and get the best educational experience we can give them. And one that's inclusive, if we really think about one that's inclusive, we have a greater likelihood of making sure that the experience they get, there's no differentiation in the experience among students. So here's the point. Every student, there is no student is coming to us and saying, I'm going to pay less because I belong to a marginalized group and I know I'm not going to be well represented in your course content and the examples you use. So, and you're not going to really consider what my cultural paradigm is as you develop your courses. So I'll pay less. Nope, that's not how it works, right? The way it works is that everybody is basically paying the same thing to get a learning experience that prepares them for whatever they plan on doing, but one part of it is to be an informed agent of change. So the rationale for us having the conversation is to find ways to level the playing field so that every student can get the benefit of the same experience at the university. Not the same meaning exactly the same, but an equitable experience. So I would probably ask to talk with the person privately and just say, just like you said, and can we have a virtual coffee to talk about this more? How does that feel, Ann? The goal for us, and I'll just add this in case this wasn't clear, the goal is not to, we do want to push people out of their comfort zones. I'm not going to lie. That's definitely what we want to do. But we also want people to understand who this academic environment is for. And when you have a community where you have such a diverse student body and you're not really paying attention to whether or not you are designing a curriculum that meets the needs of all of their students, and let's be very clear, none of us on this call are suggesting that we create a curriculum that looks at any group from a deficit model or that we somehow or another lower our expectations for our students. That's not what we're saying at all. We're saying that we want all of our students to be able to learn, and we want to create the environment that makes them most engaged, most committed, and most invested.
And just in the chat, we, as a group, we've been sharing a lot of different resources, but there's a recent Chronicle article that really dives into the case for inclusive teaching in higher ed. It's well worth a read. I put the link there. But it's just one of those things where the difference between treating each person equitably, equally, it can be something of a difficult ask. So just wanted to make sure that we thought that as we talk about diversity and inclusion over the past 2 years, Savitra and Jackie, I feel like things have really changed. It's almost as if some of the national discourse has caught up to where we've been kind of agitating and advocating, but this is really, I put it in the shared area, just if you have an opportunity to look through the Case for Inclusive Teaching that came out recently in the Chronicle, it's really persuasive. This is not about giving participation prizes. This is about a pedagogy that allows all learners to thrive, doesn't marginalize or silence. And it's hard. It's a difficult ask for all of us as staff and faculty and administrators to be inclusive and open, and it doesn't go as smoothly as the old school, sage on the stage, spitting out wisdom and waiting for everybody to receive our genius. That model is no longer something that works as for us as teachers or learners or thinkers. And so, again, thank you guys for showing up today to have this conversation. And it looks like we're kind of wrapping up. I'll hand it over to Laura.
Thanks, Laurel. Yeah, and ditto to that. This was a great conversation. I always appreciate hearing different perspectives and having the opportunity to reflect on that and what that means for my own practice. So I'd like to thank our presenters for sharing their ideas and their thoughts on this important topic, and for all of you, too, for taking some of your time out on, for some of you, a very snowy Friday morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. So again, thank you so much to our presenters. Thank you all for joining us today. If you would stay in your browser for just a minute after I close out the webinar, a survey will pop up on your screen. If you would please take that. We'd appreciate hearing some of your feedback. So with that, thank you again, and I wish you a great rest of your day and a wonderful weekend.
Thanks, Lori.